Well, howdy, Pastor Mark Driscoll here, literally running from one baseball practice to the next. Top off the Jeep, sunny, warm, nice, amazing, flip-flops on the feet, great winter here in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for letting me give you Jesus-centered Bible teaching. You asked for it, so we're re-releasing 33 sermons from 1 Corinthians, originally preached in 2007 at markdriscoll.org, working on the recommended reading list, a few other things, but wanted to spend most of our time today responding to an email that I got. Many of you send in emails, prayer requests, support, questions. I answer as many of those as I can. I pray for the folks who ask. And this one kind of just really hit me in my dad heart, and so I thought I'd just take a minute and answer it. It regards suffering and loss and grief and prayer. So a guy writes in, a buddy at the gym, a fellow meathead, I'm not picking on anybody, just reading here, whose wife has had a miscarriage, came up to me tonight while I was supersetting heavy squats and deads and started the conversation by saying, man, that prayer stuff doesn't work. Have you ever thought that? Have you ever said that? Do you know anyone else who has thought or said that? I think if we're all honest, at some point we've all asked, man, does prayer work? I talk to God, nothing happens, seems like a fail. Some people who are exploring Christianity, they have the same experience. He says, my initial knee-jerk reaction was almost tears, which in hindsight would have been appropriate. I expressed my sympathy for how he and his wife were doing, and then I became an idiot. Again, the meathead became an idiot. I'm just reading. I started babbling off how we live in a fallen world and stuff. He didn't use the word stuff, which is true, but not helpful. He told me he wasn't ready for that conversation as politely as he could. Without ripping my face off, he goes on to say, and then he walked away to do something else, conveniently on the other side of the gym. He says, I felt horrible. He goes on and says, he headed back my way after doing some decline presses with 45-pound weights in each hand, so it's a pretty big guy. I went up to him, leaned in, and said, man, I just want to apologize for what I said. I wanted to tell him that I was sorry for what had happened, and I was there for anything he and his wife needed. That seemed to reopen some dialogue between us, and he went on to tell me how his wife was unable to naturally, quote-unquote, pass the unborn child, and she was going to have him or her surgically removed, maybe even a D&C, which, if you're a Christian woman, you know what that is, and that's just horrible. Horrible. I know you have experience with this, he says. Personally, you bring comfort to many along the way. My wife and I never experienced this, and he goes on to say that they've got kids. Well, first of all, I think we've all done this. We've had somebody come up to us in a moment of struggling or difficulty or loss or grief, and rather than being present with them, comforting them, mourning with those who mourn like the Bible instructs us, we can get into Bible college professor mode, and we're into the problem of evil and the sovereignty of God and the free will of man and what the philosophers will call Theodicy and how God and evil can coexist without God being the author or responsible for evil, and it gets very complicated, and the whole time the person's just thinking, my wife's bleeding. And you're not helping because you just keep talking. And sometimes people just need comfort, and they need encouragement, they need love, they need a patient friend. And I want to thank the guy who sent me this, because he made the same mistake that many, if not all of us have, but he's learning from it. And he went back and re-engaged with his friend. Well, the first thing I would say for your buddy, if he's tuning in, I guess the newsletters for the guy at the gym, is with all sincerity, man, I am sorry. You know that the world is a jacked up place and something has gone terribly wrong when people die, especially when kids die, especially when babies die in their mother's womb. That's just the worst. God's good. God's a father. God's got a father's heart. God is the living God. Death is wrong. Death is the consequence of the whole world being upside down. Grace and I have got 5 kids, and some years ago we had a miscarriage. She had a miscarriage. And we had a few healthy kids, so I didn't really anticipate having a miscarriage. I was shocked by it. I hadn't really emotionally or mentally even considered it as a possibility. And the doctor told me at the time that about 20% of pregnancies end in some sort of miscarriage, oftentimes so early that you don't even know that you've had a miscarriage. Sometimes the baby is, moving closer toward full term, toward birth, and so you can tell that you've had a miscarriage, and that is a horrifying experience for a woman. And sometimes it sounds like in this terrible, tragic case, they may need to come in and surgically remove the baby that is now dead in the womb, which is just horrifying. And so for me, it was tough because my baby died. So I've got that grief. And now my wife is grieving the loss of the baby, and also she's physically suffering. And as a man, to see your wife suffering and not to be able to prevent the suffering of your baby or your wife, it's maddening, it's frustrating, it just feels powerless and hopeless, and I'm terribly sorry for it. I wept a lot when we miscarried, and sometimes I'd weep because the baby was gone, sometimes I'd weep because Grace was struggling, sometimes I'd weep because the kids weren't going to have their sibling. I still get grieved, and it hits me at weird moments, even years later. Somebody's missing at my dinner table, somebody's missing to get a kiss on the top of the head from their Papa Daddy at bedtime at night. It's just wrong. Now, insofar as prayer goes, let me hit that because I want to help. And this is not a criticism. Your view of prayer is probably a lot like mine, the guy who has this miscarriage with his wife. When I first got saved, I thought, well, prayer is where you tell God what you want, and God doesn't do it, so prayer doesn't work. I had a job as a concierge and a bellhop at a hotel when I was younger, and I kind of had this view like God's like a concierge and a bellhop. You tell him what you want, and he goes and does it, and if he doesn't do it, well, then he's not very good at his job. The truth is that God is sovereign. God does hear and answer prayer, but God isn't like a bellhop who runs around doing what we tell him to do. But prayer is still incredibly important, and it does work. And let me say that the first and greatest purpose for prayer is to build a relationship with God. When Jesus taught us to pray, Our Father, it's about building that relationship with your Father. And let me tell you, you're a son and you've lost a child and you worship a father who's lost his only son. There's nobody who understands like God the Father what you feel, what you're going through, and how you're doing. He's lost his beloved son. And so just like if you have a young son, you would want them to talk to you all the time about anything and everything to build a relationship and help you process it with him. God is your Father. He loves you. And he is good, not evil. He is the God of life, not death. He's holding your baby on the other side. He's got a plan to eradicate sin and death from this earth, and he has a reconciliation waiting, I believe, for you and your child. In the meantime, when you pray to him, you're building that relationship with him, and you're bringing your frustration and your concerns and your hopes and your dreams and your fears and your losses to your dad. And your dad is the best, and he's there for you. Number two, it unburdens you. It unburdens you. The burden that you are carrying is too much. There are certain burdens that we can carry alone. There are other burdens we need somebody to help us. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you are weary and heavy laden, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light." The analogy there is when there's an ox carrying, a load that's too much, they need another ox to come alongside, and then they yoke the two of them together to carry the load. Same thing you do at the gym. If you're going to really max out your bench or your squats or something like that, you'll have somebody standing nearby as a spotter to help you and to protect you just in case you're going to do serious harm to yourself, because the load is so heavy you can't carry it alone. This is an emotional, spiritual load that you need God to come and shoulder with you, and prayer is where we transfer the burden over to the Father. Number three, it's a lightning rod. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to feel things, say things, do things that may not be all that healthy or godly, and I'm not saying that's okay, but here we are in the middle of the desert. When monsoon season hits, the lightning comes, and the lightning rod will grab that lightning and then ground out the storm so that nobody gets hurt and nothing blows up. You're emotional, you're frustrated, you're a man's man, you're a dude's dude, you're a guy's guy, your baby died, your wife is bleeding. This is very frustrating. I get that. I'm sorry for that. But you're going to need a lightning rod so that you don't say and do things that cause more problems, more damage, create more collateral cleanup that needs to happen. And prayer is the lightning rod. If you read the Psalms, man, a lot of people use God as their prayer lightning rod. I'm just going to talk openly, honestly, God, I'm going to dump it all on you, and I need you to ground out my storm. Lastly, it helps us to verbal process. I don't know about you, I'm a verbal processor. I never know exactly where I'm going. I think on my feet. I think out loud. Even this is a lot of verbal processing. And if you do that with people, you can get in a lot of trouble. If you do that with your wife, you might transfer the burden to her. You need to talk to her. But when it comes to really thinking it through and praying it through and working it through and processing it through, take it to God. Let Him be the one who helps bring you emotionally through this. So prayer does work. And what I would say is right now, you're a son who needs his dad. And you need your dad to help you process the loss of your son or daughter. And you need him to come alongside and to be a father to you. And prayer is where he wants to meet you, and he wants to help you, and he wants to serve you, and he wants to love you, and he wants to unburden you, and he wants to grieve with you, and he wants to assure you that he's going to take care of you and your unborn baby. I love you. I'm praying for you. I appreciate the opportunity to teach. That's it for Mark Driscoll Ministries this week. I'll go pick up my kids at baseball practice, and I look forward to meeting your child in the kingdom of God. Hopefully, if it's a boy or a girl, we'll put a glove on their hand and let them play catch with mine. Blessings. Bye-bye.